Horror is a genre that I assume is no stranger to most of you watching this video. By its own definition, it is essentially a category of literature, film, or any other media that is meant to evoke feelings of fear, terror, and dread to its audience. But as the years went by, there have been many different subgenres of horror, each attempting to use their different strength points to invoke very different feelings of fear in the audience. For me personally, horror as a media is at its best when it actually utilizes a relatable perspective to explore the world and concepts that it has built upon, relying more on atmosphere to create a sense of unease in the consumer, instead of relying on old building block tactics such as cheap jump scares, which is exactly why some subgenres of horror, such as body, psychological, and Lovecraftian horror, tends to be viewed more favorably in recent years by casual viewers and critics alike. Well, what if I tell you that in recent times, coinciding with the rise of horror that uses video games as its medium of storytelling, I found the exact series in the form of a trilogy of games that caters more towards the horror that I've just previously described. And that, my dear friends, is exactly how we'll segue into the topic of this video. Imagine a horror media that depicts not only the other side of the horror genre, something closer and unfortunately also more relatable to our real-life circumstances, but also incorporating all the previous elements of horror I just mentioned. I'm of course talking about Project Moon, a small South Korean video game development company that sets out to tell the story about a dystopian world through the many different perspectives of their various complex characters. So, how does Project Moon actually deliver their story, and what message do they actually want to deliver to their audience?
힘들었어요. 지쳤어요. 쉬고 싶어요. 배고파요. 나가고 싶어요.
잘리고 싶어요? 뼈가 녹아요. 살이 터져요? 죽지는 않아요.
예, 죄송합니다. 그만하겠습니다.
And what does this all have to do with the title of this video? Well, there are much more than one way to answer those questions, as a lot of their stories does revolve around characters with different sets of struggles and backstories, with some that are more grounded and might hit closer to home than the others. But rest assured, as their overlying themes and narratives still remain consistent throughout. We'll hop on in as we dive back into the terrifying, yet not so alien-like world of Project Moon. The story of the games Project Moon has made thus far all takes place inside a futuristic dystopian metropolis called the City, a place characterized by its brutal environments and massively diversified districts. This simple map shows us all we need to know about the overall structure of the city, and as we can see, all 26 districts are labeled under a single letter alphabet corresponding all the way from A to Z, with the 26th district not actually being revealed on the map, and has since sparked many debate in the community to its existence. Each single district is ruled/governed by a single massive corporate entity, each with their own miracle technology called a singularity. These singularities are what makes any corporation in this city possess the status of a wing. As a quick example, if you take a look at W Corp, their whole marketing strategy is that they are able to produce a technology that is capable of nigh instantaneous travel to anywhere else in the city in the form of a train in just 10 seconds, aka warping. Now, to the average bystander in the city, this seems like a perfectly suitable means of travel. Of course, granted that you can even pay for such a luxury in the first place. But of course, like any massive corporate entity, things are not as they seem at a hindsight, because guess what? The warp trains aren't actually capable of instantaneous travel. It's much more complicated than that. You see, the actual power of their singularity is to save and load the status of a passenger that is aboard their train. Then during the warping process, which is of course marketed as a supposedly 10-second travel, the train actually departs and warps to a whole nother dimension, in which the time gap between departure from point A to arrival at point B takes tens of thousands of years. All while during the seemingly infinite duration inside the warp train, the passenger's body status such as their hunger, thirst, and even fatigue are all essentially halted, which sounds like a relief, right? Well, it might be if you didn't take into account the toll it would take on your psyche instead. Since if you're not aboard the first class section of the warp train, who are essentially spared by being put into a deep sleep chamber for the journey, well then, you're basically conscious for the entire duration of the journey. Of course, you can imagine this taking a mental toll on some of the other passengers as well, which is then usually preceded by some unfortunate events that may result in some other passengers being brutalized into a bloody mess, or even in extreme situations, mutating into a whole different entity carved out of whatever remains of the body. Oh, and remember how I said your physical status is halted? Well, I forgot to mention one more crucial detail. That actually goes for your mortality as well.
이것 봐. 목이 반쯤 붙어있는 바로 죽지도 못하고 있잖아.
So yes, you won't actually be able to die from this process, all while you still feel the grueling pain of whatever is being done to you. And once you actually arrive at the original destination you wanted to in the first place, the warp cleanup agents will now proceed to load your data back to the save points of when you first departed, forever ago by now. And all memories of suffering that the passengers went through are gone. Hence, of course, to the general public, this singularity seems like a miracle, being completely oblivious to what's actually happening behind the scenes. Now, if you think that's messed up, then congrats, you've just discovered the concept of hypercapitalism. Or at least, that's the term I would use to describe the hellscape known as the city, where these massive companies hold almost complete authority and influence over the area it resides in, completely shaping an entire culture, living conditions, and even complete autonomy to declare war against another wing, which we actually see happened before once in the story. This concept is the main theme of horror that they present in their overarching stories. But of course, it's not the only point the series as a whole is trying to convey, as it serves more as a bridge to all the other crazy stuff the city has been through. Instead, what Project Moon does better than most other stories that are trying to convey the same message is the level of detail there is in the world building, tying in directly to the ongoing geopolitics inside the city. For example, the fact that W Corp actually uses T Corp singularity to actually mess with the flow of time during the entire process of warping, which in turn interlinks both corporations' existence as being dependent on one another. Of course, since the concept of hypercapitalism seems to be one of the main points that PM is trying to explore, it is inevitable that we also discuss about inequality and the division between classes of people. And nowhere is this more apparent than the contrast between living in a nest and the backstreets, which usually forms two halves of the entire district. The nests are basically where the privileged resides in, guarded inside the safety of their homes, with guaranteed protection from the wings themselves. Usually it's also reserved for the employees of said wings, where by contrast, the backstreets is where the more unsavory characters, and unfortunately, the majority of the population inside the district resides in. Here, poverty, chaos, criminal organizations, and criminal activities are a daily occurrence. Yet even the backstreets serve a grander purpose to the denizens of the city, as they are looked upon as some sort of motivation to avoid, at least for the wealthy minority that resides in a nest, and as well for the unfortunate majority to actually make it and earn their position of living inside the nest. Now, you might be wondering how this security works in the backstreets. Well, it doesn't. The only option you have is either getting stronger, buying and implanting body modifications, willingly paying for the protection from one of the five fingers, which, long story short, are these powerful crime syndicates that rivals even the wings in their influence. Or the more famous option, hiring one of the available hired hands for protection, called fixers. Of course, fittingly enough, in the near-lawless society of the backstreets, one can imagine that being a fixer would be a very high-demand job. They are graded depending on their capabilities, from the weakest being grade 9 and the strongest being grade 1, with a special category belonging to the top of the crumbs called a color. And obviously, like many other things, they also vary heavily in pricing depending on their grade. Hiring a fixer can depend very heavily on the methodology as well, as it can be done through small private offices, but the more preferable method would be through official fixer associations, which you can imagine holds a huge monopoly over the fixer world, especially towards the previously mentioned private offices. Now, of course, after hearing all this, no one with a sane mind would really consider living in the backstreets to be desirable. I mean, of course, considering most, if not all, backstreet dwellers would probably take up the chance, if they were offered to, instead reside in the nest, under the guaranteed protection of the wings. But one of my favorite aspects in the story that Project Moon actively and splendidly does is showing the difference in perspective. Because of course, as this is the city, the citizens who do reside in the nest aren't necessarily free from all the sufferings that the ones that resides in the backstreets does. Instead, what they do have are different sets of struggles they have to face in their daily life. What I'm frankly trying to say is, oftentimes like in our own world, people in the upper class usually tends to face different sets of challenges, and PM understands this concept and visualizes it in a very realistic and relatable way. As of course, the best example of this in recent times is with the character Hong Lu, which I sadly won't get into detail about for the sake of time. Anyways, what I'm getting at here is PM has essentially created a world where the circumstances of said world shapes the everyday ongoings of the various characters in it. Whether they be from the nest or the backstreets, wealthy or broke, the city doesn't shy away from presenting different sorts of challenges to different sorts of people. And the most terrifying thing about all of this is all the other different forms of horror that the city itself produces. Because remember, so far, if you really think about it, we've only been discussing the horrors of the direct consequences of inequality produced by PM's interpretation/presentation of capitalism. And as we've seen previously with all the different nests, each with their own singularity that adds to the different flavors of dystopian hellscape, now it's the time to discuss the main driving force of the plot of the series thus far, which is of course the light, the golden bows, and the city itself as an entity. Of course, you can't really talk about Project Moon as a whole without discussing about the light and the golden bow. And we can't discuss the light and the golden bows without discussing about Lobotomy Corporation, or L Corp. Their singularity, formerly known as cogito, is sort of a substance that you can inject into a person, turning their ideas and concepts into a physical form. Of course, this is what we now know as abnormalities. An essentially immortal creature manifested from cogito, which itself is literally produced from the immortal nervous system of the creator of the project residing in a contamination chamber, with the purpose of producing enkephalin, which is essentially an eco-friendly energy source that LobCorp trades with the other wings, but it can also be consumed as a substance for relaxation, with the very huge off chance that you get addicted to the substance. Anyways, as we all know, the ultimate goal of LobCorp as a whole wasn't actually the continuous creation of enkephalin, but rather the Seed of Light project, essentially a project started by Carmen and finalized/realized by Ayin, the two founding members, which required a massive amount of energy to finalize, and as well as the suffering of hundreds if not thousands of employees in a seemingly unending loop of torment and crash outs. The light as we know it is heavily related to the more supernatural aspects of the city, and as well as the actual power system of Project Moon as a whole, as it is from the light that we get the creation of egos and distortions, Shin and Mang, as well as the peculum and sins, but also a heavier role played by an unexpected character that we all have thought to be gone, Carmen, as it is by her will that if you manage to be lured into a false sense of doubt that you will transform into a distortion, and only when you manage to overcome those doubts and be resolute in your beliefs will you manifest ego. And I absolutely love this concept. The whole power system of Project Moon, which uses the light as its source, does not rely on how physically gifted you are or how much wealth you've amassed or lack thereof, but more so on your beliefs, feelings, thoughts, and emotions, with of course Carmen taking the role of an omnipresent entity trying to get people to manifest their true form by distorting, which is I guess the whole purpose of sparing the light in the city in the first place. Speaking of, it's finally time to address the elephant in the room, which is the city itself, which is, if we're being fully honest, the most mysterious entity ironically in the entirety of Project Moon. Of course, from what we know so far, the city does have a functioning governing figure known as the head, which are separated into 3 different administrative roles in 3 different nests: A Corp for the Arbiters, B Corp for the Beholders, and C Corp for the Claws. The Arbiters of course serve as the all-powerful agents of the head, wielding singularities owned by the head to take care of any threats to the flow of the city. Beholders act as the all-observing/omnipresent entity of the city, whilst Claws are the executioners of the head, hunting for anyone who breaks taboos that have been set by them. Whilst we're at it, taboos are also a pretty interesting concept, since they're essentially set by the head themselves, and at a first glance, you would imagine these taboos to be extremes, such as maybe not allowing people to chew too loud, or not allowing you to look at other people the wrong way or something. But surprisingly, it's much more tame, as it more so ties in with the morality of the head itself. For example, they've basically set a rule of limiting the usage of firearm weaponries, and making bullets to be exotic materials that would cost you a fortune to acquire, as they see killing as more so a form of art, and projectile weapons kinda diminishes that. Then there's prohibiting the resurrection of anyone that has had their head obliterated, or just as Ryushu like to call it. And the most interesting one is the head's stance on humanity in general. Whilst they are known to banish essentially anyone they don't consider to be human, or again, anyone who seems to possess a threat to the flow of the city, their baseline of what they consider to be human is already pretty vague in the first place, since blood fiends, a race of intelligent blood-sucking vampiric immoral creatures, are not considered to be different from the average backstreets dweller in the heights of the head, whilst an AI who possesses the same features as a normal human does are thought to not be of equal value, which of course leads most people to believe that what you need to have to be considered human in the first place is real consciousness, to which of course Angela, being an AI, is thought to possess only an artificial one. Oh, and if you are known to break any of these taboos, then either the taboo hunters of N-Corp or maybe even the Claws personally will pay you a visit. And if for some reason you think you can fend off a personal visit from the head, well, think again. The final thing I want to talk about is probably the idea of the city itself being a living entity, made up of different functioning body parts, which is a belief that is commonly shared between a certain cult-like finger, which is of course the index. This idea comes from the belief that every piece of the city, no matter how insignificant, plays the role of maintaining the city's overall functionality, such as the footsteps of the average backstreet dweller, signifying its heartbeats. Of course, then we have its 5 fingers, the wings, and finally the head as its overseer. This is, for me, the most terrifying concept in the series as a whole, since the Index believes that the city itself is an absolute. There's frankly no way to fight off the will of the city, and in turn, the will of the prescripts, which is what the Index believes to be messages that the city itself is trying to convey to its inhabitants, no matter how random or absurd these prescripts are. And of course, if you even attempt to go against the flow of the city, then you would be labeled as an impurity of the city, which is the highest level of threat that anyone can achieve in the city. Whilst urban myth to Star of the City are usually within the realm assigned by the Hana Association, impurities of the city are usually handled directly by the head. So all in all, they're essentially saying to follow the flow of the city, and defying it is utterly meaningless and would get you banished to the outskirts, which we essentially have almost no knowledge of, other than being a vast area of forgotten/unexplored land, with horrifying creatures that we also have almost no concept of. Lastly, of course, if all of that wasn't enough, we also have the fantastic art and soundtracks to help accommodate and visualize the stories that PM is trying to tell. And that's the video. Overall, the story PM tries to deliver obviously comes from personal experiences. There's so many other themes that I didn't manage to deliver in this video, but the fact that PM made their core theme of horror being a subtle critique of capitalism, then managing to branch out into all the other different genres of horror, and then succeeding at that, and even somehow making it relatable to their own viewer base, will always get a round of applause for me. Though obviously we all know the actual horror is the Project Moon fanbase itself.
If I speak, I am in big trouble.
But yeah, that's all I gotta say on the matter. See you next time.